You're listening to the Lord's Army Radio Dispatch. The Lord's Army Radio Dispatch is the audio branch of lordsarmy.org, a Christian training ministry. During this weekly podcast, you'll meet individuals on the front lines of battle with the world. You'll meet Christian leaders, pastors, and lay people, all of whom have been used to the glory of God. If you are a Christian, then we encourage you to become an active duty soldier and join the battle that's going on around you every single day. Come join the Lord's Army. Thank you for listening. Today, we're going to examine and interact with a very popular and very sad video on YouTube. It's a BuzzFeed video with nearly 2 million views entitled How I Lost My Faith in the Megachurch. Now, it's interesting to me that BuzzFeed would even do a video like this. At the time of this writing, the most recent video from this is a group of clowns playing Have I Ever. Just a few videos ago was a video comparing who has the greatest French fries between the US and Canada. BuzzFeed is a YouTube station that appeals to Generation Z. Now, for those of you who don't know, Generation Z is probably the group you think of when you think of millennials. In truth, millennials are now over 30. They're homeowners, they're small business owners, they're well into a young family. 20-somethings, college students, the like, are actually Generation Z. This is the generation that doesn't remember a time without a cell phone. In fact, they barely remember a time without smartphones. This is a generation that is hyper-realistic and fairly positive compared to millennials. They share everything on social media and have been doing that forever. And so it's into this space, amid the celebrity gossip videos and eating contests, that we find the video of discussion today. The title is interestingly framed. It's entitled, How I Lost Faith in the Megachurch. Now, the journalist in me cringes at a headline like this. First of all, it's ambiguous. Is the headline saying that she lost faith in the megachurch, as in this woman no longer believes in megachurches? Or perhaps it's saying that it was while she was in a megachurch that this woman lost her overall faith. That ambivalence in language, as you'll find out, is intentional. The look of this video is also rather plain compared to most of the BuzzFeed videos. It's a simple tripod shot of a young blonde woman in her early 30s sitting in a very softly lit living space. There's a dollhouse just to the left of the woman, and there's a large yard in view in the window behind her. The video starts out like this.
In order to belong in this tribe, you have to conform, and if you have doubts, you're a dangerous person.
Wait. What? Tribes? A dangerous person for having doubts? Surely this woman is not talking about Christianity. Indeed, she's not, although she thinks she is. And the reality is that the majority of the viewers of this video believe she's talking about Christianity too. That's really the main point I'd like to leave you with today. Almost always when a person tells their testimonial of how they left the faith, it becomes clear that whatever faith he or she is walking away from is not Christianity. Let's continue.
How many leaders have been built up in these megachurches that fall because the pressure's just too much? And as I look back, we were two kids trying so hard to get it right. My name is Lisa Gungor. I am a recent author. I'm a musician and a songwriter. My mom and I found this wild church. They called themselves the Holy Rollers, and from the moment you walked in, it was loud. People were running around the church. I just think it's awesome. So while a lot of people think it's crazy, filled with crazy people, I loved it, and I was in.
Notice that she refers to herself and her spouse as two young kids. Remember, she's a solid decade or two older than the majority of the viewers of this channel. The subtle implication is that if someone is still holding on to their faith, then that person is simply less mature than she is now. And what about that church she's describing? People are, quote, running around and acting crazy? She may have loved it, but immediately I'm worried about a church with a worship service that could be described in this way. After all, 1 Corinthians 14:40 says that, and I'm quoting, all things should be done decently and in order. I'm not sure this church meets that criterion.
I ended up going to college, and I start dating this boy who's like super Christian. We get married really young. We're too young to even rent a car when we're married. We didn't drink or cuss. So we end up getting a job at a really big church in Michigan. And this church was the size of a mall. I mean, it's huge. There's about 10,000 people. We built a house out in the country. They paid for our car, for our gas. They paid for Michael's school. We were 20 years old, and we had this dream job. We didn't have sex with each other before we were married. We waited to kiss. We did it all right. We had this transactional idea of God, and that's why we landed this really great, awesome job. We started trying to get pregnant, and we couldn't get pregnant. And people would tell me, but just pray and believe, like, just say it and it will happen. And I thought, I just don't know how that can be true.
Did you catch the foreboding phrase? The phrase that is the absolute linchpin of this whole interview. Actually, it's the linchpin for this woman's whole spiritual life. She said that she and her fiancé avoided sin because they had a, quote, transactional view of God, end quote. You see, a transactional view of God is incompatible with actual Orthodox Christianity. Imagine putting a filet mignon in front of a rabbit. The rabbit is not likely to be intrigued by the thing. Why? Is the rabbit showing constraint? Is the rabbit concerned about his or her blood pressure so that it's avoiding red meat? No, the rabbit is uninterested in the filet mignon because that's not what rabbits eat. This is how it is with Christians. A Christian is a new creation with a new heart. Once we're born again in Jesus Christ, we're given a new heart, one that desires to please God. Jesus has paid the fine for us, and so we do not avoid things like cursing and fornication because we're trying to get on God's good side. Instead, we avoid sin because we have no desire for it. Our greatest desire is to do the will of God, and that's how we can know for sure, for a fact, that we're saved. The transactional view of God, however, is standards works righteousness. I'll try that again. The transactional view of God, however, is standard works righteousness. It says that we should avoid this laundry list of things, and by doing that, we can call ourselves Christians. But the reality is that this kind of system is unsustainable. As the Bible makes clear, we all sin. And so inevitably, if someone is trying to please God through their own actions rather than the righteousness of Christ, then they will absolutely always fall away.
We were traveling the world. We were going overseas and playing to sometimes 60,000 people in arenas. The more we ran into other people's stories, the more we started doubting what we'd been given. And Michael and I took this trip in Europe from Rome. We took trains up to Krakow. We visited the concentration camps. We walked through the crematoriums. And it's real hard to come back to America and pray for something when you have these images of people's hair in piles and children's shoes in piles. Your ideas on what a good God is can change pretty dramatically. So I came back and found myself trying to pray for us to have a baby, or pray for our church, or pray for these different things. And I just kept thinking about the concentration camp and how my whole perspective on my faith has been a transaction. If I'm good enough, or if I pray enough, if I believe enough, then I get blessings and I get a baby or a good life. It's not how life is.
Just like we saw in the last radio dispatch, the framing of the narrative is key. This small-town American goes overseas and gains perspective. Her new, more global and well-informed opinion is that Christianity is just not possible given the new perspective she's gained. I have no doubt that it's unconsciously done, But this is an old school sales tactic called feel, felt, found. It goes like this. I totally understand how you feel. I felt the same way, but then I found ... This sales tool may be an old one, but it's effective. As in, I understand how you feel as a Christian, and I felt the same way. But then I went overseas and found out that evil happens in the world. Of course, for Orthodox Christianity, evil in the world is exactly what we should expect to find. She then begins to experience personal trials. Here, she lays out fully her false theology. If she is good enough, then she will receive blessing. Then she says, that's not how life works. Well, to that I say amen. She's exactly right. That's absolutely not how life works. It's also not how Christianity works. Karma says that the world works that way. New Age spirituality says that the world works that way. But Christianity says that we live in a fallen world. Moreover, we ourselves are fallen. So not only do we have horrible things happening in the world around us, but also we can never be good enough ourselves. That's why the cross is our only hope. We as humans either stand before God and say, I'm good enough, or we will say, I'm not good enough, I am unworthy, so wash me in the blood of Christ that my sins may be imputed to him, and his righteousness be imputed to me. If you think you're good enough, or even could be good enough, then you're missing the whole point of the cross and the whole point of the Christian faith. So here we have a woman who does not believe in Christianity, but rather she believes in a false religion based on works righteousness. She believes a faith similar to Islam, or Hinduism, or Buddhism, faiths that are built upon our actions rather than the actions of God. And she's finding out that life doesn't work that way.
We all had this perspective on who was in and who was out. For Michael and I, that began to change slowly. You have to conform, and if you have doubts, you're a dangerous person. I remember looking around going, what am I doing here? What am I building with my life? We realize we're no good for this place that we're at because our ideas have changed so much and that we needed to leave. I started weeping and crying and freaking out, going, what are we doing? We don't know what we're doing. Do you realize what we just left? Like, we left all of our security and we started becoming heretics, you know. We go to Denver. We end up starting a little house church in our apartment. Our whole goal for it was that it was inclusive and that it was vulnerable and that it was this place that we had always dreamed of church being. More questions and more doubt were arising for Michael and I. Our like heretic levels kept like shifting and changing and like kind of one-upping each other. Eventually, Michael and I, we get pregnant, and I was really glad for that because it didn't feel like our daughter was this answer, right? Like, we really went through this trial and this suffering, and now we're getting this baby girl. Our ideas of God are deconstructing. What is it that we still believe? But Michael looks at me and just says, I don't believe in God anymore. Like, I can't believe any of it. And he just ends up like talking more. And I remember just like freezing in my whole body because there's always been, I was okay with the questions, but I wasn't okay with that. I end up getting pregnant again, and we go through a whole tour with me being pregnant. And for Michael, he feels all this freedom in atheism because he's not struggling anymore. For me, I'm feeling all this anxiety because I want him to believe a certain thing, and I want myself to believe a certain thing. And I'm still just struggling hard to belong and to be okay.
Here's another narrative. This young, exciting couple begins a brand new journey of faith, or lack thereof. They head off on adventure, discovering what it's like to be free from that old-time religion. It's all happy and joyous and exciting, and they finally get that child. And the only thing, even somewhat holding her back, is her desire to get her husband to believe a certain thing. She just hasn't quite let go of religion enough yet.
And I ended up having to quit a tour early because our baby's having difficulty growing. She's born a month and a half early. She's just beautiful, and like with our first daughter, we're both crying. It's just this beautiful, beautiful moment, and then she turns blue. I remember this nurse coming over, and she's like shaking and looking really worried, and she tells us our daughter has Down syndrome. And so then the days that follow, we find out that Lucy has 2 heart issues, and she has to have heart surgery her second day of life, and then she has to have another heart surgery when she's 6 months old. Everything really changed for me. So I feel like this story that I've been living my whole life kind of came to this climax with Lucy's birth. When Lucy was born, we had this huge social media blow up. And there's stories in magazines and all over the internet about our heresy, and we were completely pushed out of the church world, of this tribe that we really loved, and really painful and devastating at so many times.
This is the part of the interview that I feel genuinely sorry for this woman. Ultimately, she was failed by her church. She was attending a church that told her they were Christians. They pretended to be Christians. Instead, they taught her a works-based religion that is actually opposed to Christianity. And then, as she began to reject that false faith, they pushed her out. And this tragic story happens every single day. Then, of course, there's her personal struggle with a child with health problems. She's been taught that these things won't happen. And so when they do, well, that's the final straw in severing her ties with her church.
Looking back on all of it, I'm deeply grateful for all of the things that happened. And I don't want what we used to have. We live in a different headspace now. It's a completely different perspective. And the connection I feel with my daughters, there's no us versus them. There's no you and I. There's no winners and losers. Part of my dream is that people wouldn't be so afraid and so scared. I know a lot of people are still in this very conservative, fundamental bubble, and they can be so afraid to break out of that for fear of what will happen to their lives. And this happens in any religion. So my dream is that we're not so afraid.
The idea that there is no us versus them outside of religion, I can tell you, is completely untrue. I was an atheist, one who actively engaged in public debates against Christianity. Unfortunately, humans always look for people who disagree with them, and then they look down on them. Because we're Christians, however, we must never do that. We cannot listen to an interview like this and think ill of this woman. The simple reality is that the religion she ultimately came to reject is one that's worthy of rejecting. The Christianity that she was taught is a false one that should be left and rejected. She came to the right conclusion about her religion. It's a bunch of nonsensical hogwash that ultimately leads to disappointment. What she needs is someone to preach the true gospel to her, perhaps for the very first time. She needs to hear about what Jesus has done for her and what the implications of that are. This should always be our attitude towards the lost. Never looking down on them, but seeking to share the gospel with them. This concludes this particular dispatch from the front lines of the Lord's Army. If you want more information or content, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and on Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Apply what you have learned in this episode. Remember, you do not become a great man or woman in Christ without taking action. One easy way you can help spread the gospel right now is by subscribing to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, just by liking us and leaving us a review, you can have a massive impact in how many people we reach. Go out there, take action, join the battle. LordsArmy.org.